All right, welcome to Blockchain Cryptocurrency and Web3 Foundations Module 3, Smart Contracts and DApps. So again, we'll remind you that we'll be taking some notes during this presentation so that we can use them in the class discussions. So questions that come up, terms that you don't recognize, if something's confusing or missing, this is all good to take down. So take a moment, get something up to write, and we'll get on together. So last time we left off on what is cryptocurrency, right? And we know that this is effectively a blockchain that is dedicated to storing financial transactions or financial information of some kind, right? So we know that it's self-sovereign when we're talking about the ownership of who owns these funds. Through public key cryptography, we're able to control these. And there's peer-to-peer interactions. We don't have to rely on a third party. All we need to do is connect to this uncensorable network to make all this stuff happen. But what else can blockchains do, right? We don't just have to store financial transactions. That's definitely one thing we could do there. But what about identity? Like things like credentials and diplomas and things like this, deeds or rights, and things like permits to be able to do things, or even more abstractly, news articles, blogs, stuff, audio-visual. There's anything, and really, blockchain is just a database, so we could store anything. But what if we store code? And particularly, if we store code and an engine to be able to run this code, and universally across the network, we can decide that, again, that immutability is guaranteed in this blockchain network. So enter smart contracts. This is what smart contracts do, right? They're pre-programmed terms and conditions that are locked into a blockchain database so they can't be tampered with. And they may include storage and transfer of things like cryptocurrency assets. So we know that anything that these smart contracts are programmed to do, they'll actually be executed, and we can put money into this execution, right? And because it's run on this decentralized network that validates these programs, that's absolutely immutable and 100% transparent. There's some caveats. We can do some privacy, but for the most part, you should assume these are all transparent for anybody to view. And the terms are final on issuance. That means that when I submit this smart contract to the network and people lock into this, there's no way to turn back, right? We can program, though, again, because it's a program, we can do arbitrary things in this program, ways for you to back out to get yourself out of this contract under those pre-programmed terms and conditions. But again, once it's there, you can't change it around. So this term comes up pretty often. This is unstoppable code. One of the videos this week will be learning a little bit more about what that means exactly. But it's a very interesting construct to think that this is the first time we're able to do this with programming in general. That once something's out there, it can't be faked or rewritten. So then what is a token, right? In the context of smart contracts specifically, this is a unit of account that is intrinsic to a smart contract. Typically on the Ethereum network that you'll see is an ERC20 standard, and this is a fungible token that we'll get into in a moment here that lives within the smart contract. In fact, this contract itself, that could be its only purpose, is to be an ERC20 standard compatible token, right? So, but typically these are used in the context of the contract itself, or as we'll find out, a DApp, decentralized application. So something that's more than just money, but potentially works with money. It grants you access to features. You might gain rights or be able to use something inside of this contract when you have these tokens available to you. And typically, in the context of cryptocurrencies, these tokens are exchangeable. So they aren't locked to a particular person, for instance, giving access to a particular feature of a website or something like this. They can be exchanged. I can trade it for whatever I'd like with anybody else. And they may or may not represent value. Typically, though, in the cryptocurrency space, this is what people are interested in exchanging. Right? That's the thing people are excited about. And there are definitely other definitions that exist, but typically token, when you're talking in the cryptocurrency space, is implying that it's part of a contract. Whereas coin is the other term that's used, is more typically associated with a native network unit of account. So things like Bitcoin would be a coin, and Ethereum would be a coin. Whereas one of the tokens that is very popular is DAI. This is a stable coin that's locked to the US dollar, and it's an ERC20 standard token. So, but again, depending on who you talk to, these definitions might change. Typically, though, that's what people are talking about. And so there are really two key distinctions when we're talking about tokens, right? And I kept alluding to this ERC20 standard where we've got fungible tokens, meaning that any one of a set of that particular token type is effectively the same, right? If I take $1 out of my pocket and I give it to you, and you take a different dollar and give it to me out of your pocket, it's effectively even, right? There's no real difference, even though there's physically different objects, right? Whereas non-fungible tokens, right? These are things that are not one-to-one exchangeable. If I take my cat and lend it out to you, and you give me a different cat back, I don't think we're even in that trade, right? So, but in the token context, the typical standard in the Ethereum space is this ERC 721, and there are other standards that are developed that we can get into in the weeds if you'd like. But the idea is that they are unique in the world. So we might have a set, for instance, here we can see CryptoKitties. All of these live within this single confines. They are cats, right? But they're all unique in their own way. So each individual cat is different, even though they belong to a set. So understanding the hype, I encourage you to check out in the slides this little bit of a video. It goes through the history from roughly 2013 out to roughly 2018 and looking at initial coin offerings. So again, confusing the terms there, but tokens that are being generated pretty much exclusively on the Ethereum network and then sold for Ethereum is typically what was going on at this time. And looking at the market value, what that Ethereum was worth, people were effectively creating a token which could do all kinds of magical things, as they might describe in typically a white paper. So describing what they'd like to build as opposed to what they had built already and wanted to get funding for in some way, and raising Ethereum for this. So they'd give you a token in return. You'd give them Ethereum, and in return, you'd get one of these tokens associated with one of these projects that you can see here. And it was a massive boom. Well, literally billions of dollars came apparently out of the woodwork from all over the place and raised a bunch of interest in this entire industry. In fact, I would say that for the most part, this is why so many people are interested in blockchain, is because it enabled this ICO craze and a lot of money to be raised. And then more so to the point today, we're right in the middle of what I would argue is another craze. Here in 2021, we see NFTs in general exploding everywhere. So artwork that's generated and sold at auction for this NFT, it can raise unbelievable amounts of money. So this one we're looking at here is by an artist called Beeple that was sold at the Christie's auction house for around $69 million, which is pretty crazy when you're thinking about that this is simply a representation that someone owns this out in the world, but the actual artwork itself is publicly accessible because it's all digital here. So something to think about as we're moving forward is some of the interesting ways in which value is being associated with these ICOs as well as this NFTs, potentially disproportionate to what the actual underlying value is versus what the price might be. Of course, that's all up to the eyes of the beholder here, right? But typically then people are really excited about cryptocurrencies, tokens, and NFTs, right? Because you can make a lot of money with them. But that typically implies, well, I got to use blockchain in some way. And I want to really encourage you, and this is kind of the theme throughout the course, is that you really do not want to use blockchain because it has something to do with money and might make you a whole bunch of money. That's a very poor use for using blockchains in general. If you want to make money and that's your goal, then probably exploring further into what this course is about isn't really going to help you, right? So what we will talk about, though, is potential applications for these things, right? So a token, right, presumably is associated with something of value, something you can do with it. And this is what decentralized applications, or DApps, are built around, right? So these guys typically interact with one or more blockchain networks, and they are generally user-facing, right? So this is something that your average Joe might go out and play around with, as opposed to the blockchain technology itself might be more developer engineering focused. And typically these things interact with then contracts that are already deployed on a network. So these smart contracts that we've developed and then launched, for instance, on Ethereum might be one place. And then we interact with this user-facing application there. So that's a DApp. Right, there's plenty of examples. The State of the DApps website here is great for this. There's other listings all over the internet, so this is definitely a good DuckDuckGo search if you want to find a listing there. But to give you a sampling, many applications are being used all across different markets and different kind of categories here. The theme, though, is typically because the novelty that blockchains enable you to do is deal with money in a secure way online digitally. This is what most of them revolve around. But that's not entirely true. So identity, for instance, social content, these things live outside of that, at least somewhat, because cryptocurrency is typically involved. They tend to blur the lines. But there really is a huge ecosystem that's emerging in general. And I really encourage you to go and explore, if you haven't done so already, some of these dApps that are out there. A lot of them are building on Ethereum. This is the most commonplace. And you can see this is a 2019 snapshot. And definitely there's an explosion all over. But typically most of the places still live on top of Ethereum or Ethereum compatible networks that exist out there in the world. So if you would like to, we can bring this up in some of the class discussions as we're moving forward about what Ethereum potentially killers live out there in terms of who's going to overcome this total market dominance, at least at this moment with Ethereum. And with that said, I would encourage you now to go back on the module 1. We are looking at this Ethereum viewer, but one thing that wasn't necessarily apparent, you can see here on the presentation slides, there's these notepads with a plus that are in blue circles here. These are contract calls. So if you are technically inclined, go back and check out some of these contract calls that are happening on Ethereum. Clicking on one of these bubbles will give you an indication of the contract call that had happened. And you can do some sleuthing on the block explorers, like what was the contract that was being interacted with and why. And as you'll find, a lot of these are related to financial applications of some kind. So I encourage you to go and check it out. So that's it for Module 3, at least of the slides. So we explored kind of a wide range of what you can potentially do with smart contracts. And we'll get much more into the details throughout the readings and the videos this week, and really who's using things that make sense. So that's what we'll start to touch on. And really next module, we're going to start to really look into things that go beyond the hype, that actually have some really interesting novel things and why you'd want to use blockchain over a typical system that's out there in the world. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the discussions.